Welcome to Pioneer Mindset, a place where we challenge our mindset and address the discomfort in both business and life by finding clarity resulting in bold conviction. I'm your host, Garrett Ruskamp, fifth generation farmer, husband, and father from rural Nebraska. Whether you're navigating frustration from past decisions or worry about the uncertainty you face today in your business, we're going to learn from our struggles and take on new challenges with a resilient mindset. Join me as I share my journey of struggles I faced in agriculture as a farmer and family man. I'm ready to dive into honest conversations to tackle the mindsets surrounding key issues that rural ag business owners face that will ultimately help you gain control, leading to a profitable and sustainable business. Let's adapt to Pioneer Mindset and get to it. Welcome back, everyone, to this week's episode of Pioneer Mindset. So last week, I traded 1 hour of my time for $7,900. All right, so that's what we're going to dive into here on this week's episode. But furthermore, we're going to just be talking about what are you trading your time for? And really, what's the return on your time? ROT. I've thrown that phrase out a few different times. We've always heard of ROI. We know what that is, return on investment. Well, in this case, the investment is our time. All right, so what are you getting for your time? All right, what are you trading your time for? And how can we get the most of it? Right? How can we maximize that? How can we increase that? Right? So I told you just before, I traded 1 hour of my time for $7,900. All right. So what am I actually talking about here? And you're probably also thinking, well, sign me up. That sounds great. I want to do that. I want to get to where my time is. I'm trading just even 1 hour of my time. My return on investment is pretty high when we're trading that for $7,900. I mean, that's higher than a lawyer's fee. That's higher than a lot of things that a guy can think of. And you're like, yeah, sign me up for a full week, a full month, a full year of trading 1 hour of my time for that kind of cash, right? Yeah, that would be great. In all honesty, this isn't that kind of story, but this is a story that we can really just maximize the return on our time. All right, so what am I talking about here? So last week, I got a text from our farm insurance agent, and he was like, hey, farm renewal's coming up. We usually do that in April timeframe. He's like, should probably come in and sit down and go over a few things. And it's always one of those things where it's like, all right, yeah, I know we need to do this. I know we need to sit down in the office and go through, kind of everything that we have, all the policies that we have, and make sure everything's current and updated to where we're currently at within our operation today. But usually, in general, things don't change much, maybe a couple little tweaks here or there. And it's just one of those things that we feel like we just have to go through. It's really a really mundane task that's just not very fun, really, in all honesty. And there's a lot of times, every time you text me, it's like, it's definitely not a priority. It's definitely something that I put off as much as I can. Or one of those things where literally I do it just to get it checked off my list so it's done and out of the way. But it's also one of those things where I feel like I've thought about skipping. Like, how important is this truly? Usually it's just me that goes into the meeting. My dad doesn't even come. Like, it's not a lot of changes. We're just with that farm insurance meeting, we're maybe updating current values of everything, like maybe the equipment asset values and all that stuff. What do we do for custom work? Who's all kind of different insurers that we need to be mindful of? All that other stuff. Well, this year, one of the big changes that we were talking about was actually changing our deductible. All right. So we're changing our deductible, which on the policy that we had was currently $2,500 per instant. All right. And so he's like, well, with the company that we've been working with, it's actually nationwide. With the company that we've been working with, they've actually changed some things this year that makes it more advantageous for us to increase that deductible and get some premium savings. All right. So I was like, all right, sounds good. We'll explore it, but I don't want to change that deductible too much. What if we start having some different incidents or claims that we need to take out, right? And so with that, I'm like, well, I'll keep it in mind, but maybe just kind of a small little change to start. And so, at the end of the meeting, he's like, well, what kind of different deductibles do you want me to quote? So we were currently at $2,500. I said, well, let's bump it to $3,500, $5,000, even let's go $7,500. Because he said there's been a few guys seeing some of those big changes. And really what we're trying to do here, what some of those guys are trying to do when we increase that deductible is almost self-insure. All right, so the premium savings that we're going to have, we're going to be able to maybe put that aside and save it for when we do have those claims at some point, because they will happen at some point. Hopefully not very frequently and hopefully not very severe or back to back or often, I guess. And so anyways, what we're talking about here was trying to basically see what we could save on our premium by increasing our deductible. And so with that, he had texted me back later that day after the meeting and he's like, this is pretty crazy. But basically he sent me the values. And honestly, I can't even remember the smaller ones when we increased the small deductible just a little bit because I was just focused on the big number. So basically, when we increased our deductible, it was from 2,500 to $7,500, basically $5,000 there. We had a premium savings per year of $7,900. All right, so that's what I was talking about when I traded 1 hour of my time for sitting in the meeting with the farm insurance agent, going over the policies, going over all the mundane stuff that's not very fun, that nobody wants to do or nobody takes the time to actually do. And by doing so, we were actually just able to save $7,900 on our premium. All right. So now I want to, all the naysayers out there, all the negative Nellies, if you will, were like, well, what happens if you start having all these claims? Yeah, that's very possible. There's things that are all absolutely out of our control. That's why we have insurance. All right. That's something that we're probably going to just roll the dice on. And at that point, yeah, there's a lot of things that we can't control. But at the same time, if we don't have claims, why would we turn down an opportunity to just save $7,900 on our premium? All right. That's just money back into our pocket that we're not shelling that out to somebody else. All right. So if we can maybe save that aside for a rainy day, in our operation, if you go, sometimes you got to look back on historicals. That's not always the best way to make decisions moving forward, is to look backwards, but got to think about, okay, what kind of claims have we had in the past? And typically our claims were smaller claims, nothing huge, nothing major, a couple big ones on our history, but they were usually, maybe once a year. All right. So, and this is per year, so even right now, if we had a $7,500 claim tomorrow, or a claim tomorrow that we turned it in, and it was, maybe a bigger one, and so we had to pay out that $7,500 deductible, well, we'd still be ahead, $7,900, so $400 there. But if you factor in, we only changed that deductible $5,000. So we're still actually further ahead yet, because we would have had to pay out that $2,500 regardless, because that's what our deductible was, right? So this isn't a talk about insurance. Okay, that's not where we're going with this. But it's literally about just taking our time and trading it for the maximum, that amount that we can, or just even being mindful of what are we trading our time for. All right. And in this, I was asking the agent as we were going through this conversation, I was like, how many guys actually sit in here and come in and do this renewal? Because it's not the most fun. And he knows that. He said there's a lot of guys that, like, I got to sit there and I'll remind them, I'll send them 3, 4, or 5 texts and they still don't come. And so eventually I just, stop bugging them. And so they don't even come in to sit and do this. It's just kind of rinse and repeat, same policy that they had last year, right? This happens all the time with insurance and all the time with different tasks within the business, because we don't want to focus on the time. We don't want to be the businessman that sits down in that office, that does our due diligence to see once what we can do to make this better, right? And so that's where I just thought it was really interesting on how if you reframed that, what's possible here by going to sit in this office, by doing this uncomfortable thing. Maybe it's sitting in this office with crop insurance or farm insurance. Maybe it's sitting in the banker's office trying to negotiate interest rates. Maybe it's sitting in your own office, analyzing the numbers, making better decisions, right? And so with that, that's what I'm just trying to help you try to be mindful of. What is the return on our time? All right. What is the return on our time? And before we get into that, I want to share just another story, another example, because I think it's easier to relate to different examples and how can we get our mind thinking a little bit differently. This is pioneer mindset, right? So we got to reframe that mindset a little bit to where, maybe we can adapt this a little bit easier. So another example here. And so maybe these examples don't fit your bill, but just think about something else in your operation that you could maybe adapt this to. Okay, so this other example here is I actually just got signed up for one of the NRCS's programs. It's the RPP program, which is the Regenerative Pilot Program. All right. And so with that, they're basically it's similar to EQIP program, to where, we're trying to adapt some different farming practices, whether it be cover crops or pest management or nutrient management, and trying to adapt some of those different practices. Well, this recently came out here at the beginning of the year, beginning of 2026, and they had a really short window for sign up. And so with that, I don't think they got a ton of applications, and it increased the funding. Literally the year prior, we had actually just entered into a EQIP contract on majority of our acres, and they increased the funding substantially. And so if, like, even a quick example for the cover crops, I think for our existing EQIP application for a single species cover crop, I think we're getting, somewhere around $50 an acre, which is pretty good, pretty good. And then for now, I was increased it all the way up to $70+ an acre for a single species cover crop. And you're literally getting paid to plant this cover crop. I mean, seed and application doesn't cost even probably half that, or somewhere around that. So anyways, I went in there and we signed up at a couple extra acres that did not get into the original EQIP contract. It was only 160 acres. I had 2 fields, And so I signed that up for this new program. All right. And so went in there and literally just signed the contract. Now, this is a 5-year contract, so it's stretched out over time. But between the pest management, the nutrient management, and even the cover crops, the entire contract amount was 130,000. All right. So 130,000 over 5 years. Granted, I'm going to have a lot of time wrapped up into this. So it's hard to kind of put that return on time. I can't give you a dollar amount like I did just before, trading 1 hour of my time for X amount of dollars. I can't give you that. But at the same time, when I was sitting in there in this office and we're going over things, and I'm like, man, it's a nice day out. I got better things I need to do. I've seen Snapchats. People are out spraying. I need to be getting this and that and the other thing done. I should be doing other things, right? And my mind is turning. I'm like, just literally sitting here trying to get out of this office as soon as I can so I can go do something else. I literally just had to take a deep breath. And I'm like, okay, we are doing this for a reason, and asking ourselves, why are we doing this? All right. Yes, it may not be very fun. It may not be the easiest thing to do. We might have to change a few things here and there. But overall, if this fits our practices, if this fits what we're trying to do on our farm, this makes sense. We are getting a pretty good return on my time for me to sit here in this office, for me to sit down and put this information together for them that they actually need, right? To actually be compliant for these different programs. Now, this may not be your cup of tea. It may not seem like this is something you want to do, but we got to ask ourselves, what was my return on my time for that hour I sat in that office? Was it $7,900? No, probably not. Probably not, but still probably a pretty good return on my time. Pretty good return on time. And so that's where I just want you to kind of really think about how you can do some different things, how we can prioritize our time so that way we can get the most out of it, right? So asking ourselves, kind of back to this question of what's your return on time? What is it currently? What is it currently right now? And this is so very hard for us farmers to answer, including myself. For a lot of farmers, it's hard because one, we don't track it. We don't track our time, especially as business owners, as the entrepreneurs ourselves. If you're going to work somewhere else and you're getting an hourly wage, obviously we know what that's worth. Maybe it's, $20, $30 an hour. We know what that hourly wage is, so we can factor that in pretty easy, right? But if you're sitting there grinding day after day, week after week, and for years upon years, and all the time that we put into this, maybe you're up at the crack of dawn and you get in after bedtime and you're putting all this time into it, and it's so variable. So it's really hard for us to actually track our time and know what our return on time is. And I'll be honest, that's me as well. I've been really poor at actually tracking my time, especially on the farm, because there's so many hours that go into everything. Even in the evenings, we're maybe doing some research on the computer, or maybe we're typing up an email, or we're working on a crop plan in the evenings, and we put all this time into the business, right? And so it's really hard to track our time because we'd probably be really surprised if we did that, what our return on time actually is. And so that's where I feel like for farmers, it's really hard, because if you did do your due diligence, if you did track your time, if you did know, okay, if I literally worked 100 hours this week, and I do that 52 weeks out of the year, hopefully you're not working that much. But if you do that and then you say, okay, my take home at the end of the day is this, my profit is this, you'd probably be pretty surprised how poor that ROT actually is. All right. And so, side little comment there, that was part of the decision when we sold our cows a few years back. When we sold our cows back in 2023 and we made that decision to sell the cows, that was part of the reason. Because when we were looking at how much time we actually spent on the cows, with cattle, with livestock, there's always something going wrong, always something that's sick that needs tended to, or something getting out, or fixing the fence, or, doing this, that, or the other thing, where I was sitting back and like, man, we're just spending so much time in this area, this sector of the business, that I feel like we just weren't getting that return on time. So that was one of the factors that actually went into making that decision. So back to what is your time actually worth? The one thing that I was actually thinking about here is sometimes the more you know, the harder it actually is to grasp this concept. All right. And so what I mean there is, if you do a good job and you actually track your time really well, and you realize that maybe our time is not spent the best right here, then it makes it really hard for us to continue doing some of those tasks, which is kind of the point, right? It's kind of the point for us to step back and realize, okay, maybe I don't need to be doing this task. Maybe I need to be focusing my time elsewhere. And that's what we're getting to, and I'll get there in a second. But sometimes the more you know, the harder it actually is when you're in the midst of it, when you're in the middle of it, when you're in the trying to just acknowledge where you're actually at and then move the needle, right? So that's kind of the next comment here is the more you try to move the needle, the harder the needle is to actually move. I'm going to re-say that if I kind of stumbled over my words, but the more you try to move the needle, the harder the needle is to actually move. Okay. So what I mean there is literally if you're like me, and as I'm recording this, I'm kind of in the midst of this right now. All right. Yesterday, a good example of my day is I actually went to town, went to the sale barn, was sitting in the sale barn, trying to maybe look at buying some calves here. And so I sat in the sale barn for an hour. It wasn't anything that came through that was really fitting for what we're looking for. I mean, it was good to sit there, but didn't really get much done. Now, granted, after that, I went to that NRCS office, filled out that application, was doing some stuff there. So pretty good return there. But then, just all these little other things that happen, running some errands, running to bomb guards and all these little things that just seem to add up, right? And taking the time to literally drive 20 minutes to town, to drive 20 minutes home, stopped at a friend's house, got some potatoes. And so it just seems like all that stuff adds up and it's necessary stuff. But when you're in the midst of analyzing your time, knowing where your time is best spent, and then doing something else that is just at the time probably required, right? You still need to get that stuff done. It's a really hard strain on you as to what you need to be doing. But that's also kind of the point of this, right? That's also kind of the point is to acknowledge where your time is currently spent and if you're getting that return on time. So I say this literally from somebody that is in the middle of it and that's trying to do the best job that I can, but also knowing that, it's a work in progress, right? And so that's one thing I want to really bring up here is just to, acknowledge whatever season that you're currently in and where you're trying to go with that, what you can actually do to improve your time. All right. So that's kind of the next step here is, what can you do to improve your ROT, return on time, and get the most out of it? Because that's the goal, right? We got to manage the resources that we have, usually just time and money. And the time is the one thing that we can't get back. All right. There's only 24 hours in a day. We just need to make sure that we're doing the best to allocate our time for those hours, and trading our time, trading those hours for the most that we can. And so that's where we're going to talk about this next is, what are some things, what are some practical things that we can do? And, especially as you're probably hearing this, we're getting into late April, into May, into, hopefully in the heart of planting season already. And depends on what area you're in. And it's always busy, right? So that's where, trying to acknowledge what can we do to get the return on time, ROT. All right. So the one thing I want to start with here is actually the one thing I'm probably the poorest at is tracking time. How can we improve our time? Well, you can't manage what you don't measure, right? So how do we improve that? Well, maybe track our time. Track how many hours that you spent in this sector of the business or that one. Or if it's just in general on the farm, maybe you don't realize that we're spending 100 hours a week. It might not seem like that, but if we figure, okay, well, I started at 7 o'clock this morning and I didn't quit till 7 o'clock in the evening. And that's what my time was, and I was working pretty much all the way through. We'd probably be surprised, especially as farmers and business owners, and I'd say business owners there, how much time we're actually spending within the business. All right, within the business. Okay. And I'll make that comment there as we get into this as well. But working on the business versus in the business, but majority of our time is probably spent in the business. So just tracking that time, tracking how much time it takes to do different tasks. And we can get as detailed as we want with that, but it's just a matter of starting somewhere and realizing how much time we actually spent. Because going back to the comment I made earlier, trying to figure out what our time is actually worth and what our return on time actually is, well, we don't know what that number is. In most cases, we haven't done that math because we haven't tracked our time. Or on the second part of that equation is we don't know what kind of profit or what we're actually taking home. Okay. So if we kind of break this down to a really simple math equation, and we've got basically the number of dollars left over at the end of the year, whether it be profit or your take home, and we divide that by the number of hours that we spent within the business, that's your return on time. That's what your per hour wage is. And if we did that, we might actually be surprised what that number is. But once again, going back to that equation, we can't do that math equation as simple as it is. Dollars left over divided by hours spent. Simple equation there, right? That's like second, third grade math. But we can't do that if we don't know what the numbers actually are. Okay. So that's where we got to track the time and even track the numbers furthermore. And so being able to figure out what that number is. And by the way, it's just one of those things where we haven't been trained to actually look at and use that as a guide for our business, a guide for how we're getting that return on time. Okay. So that's a good place to start. how to improve that. Well, we don't know how to improve it if we don't know what the numbers actually are. All right, maybe we do the math and we figure out we're only making $15 an hour. Why are we doing all this? You know what I mean? So then that's where those questions come up when you're asking yourselves, why are we doing all this to make $15 an hour when I can go to town and get $20 an hour job? So different thoughts that might come up there. Or maybe you realize that you're actually really efficient and you're making 30, 40, $50 an hour or more. And so with that, that's what we're trying to get to is just what that number actually is. Okay. And so that way we can improve upon that and have kind of that starting place. Okay. That kind of base to where we're at and then go from there. All right. So the next one here is going to be just prioritizing tasks. All right. Pretty simple there, prioritizing tasks. And what comes up for me is this phrase of your priorities are where you spend your time. And so we might think to ourselves, well, these are all my priorities, but if I go do something else, well, at the end of the day, what is the priority? Well, your priorities are where you spend your time. So that's where we can just try to prioritize our tasks and realize, okay, what is truly most important? What do we feel is going to get us the most return on our time? All right, is it sitting in the tractor mowing ditches, or is it going to the FSA's office? Is it going to the banker's office? Is it negotiating those interest rates, talking to the farm insurance? All those things that we don't want to do, we do not want to do them, right? But realizing if we do want to improve our return on time, if we want to improve the dollars that ultimately come back to our pocket, we need to prioritize the tasks that are going to get us the highest return on time, right? So, really just prioritizing those tasks and then carrying out that plan. All right. So, this is the next one here, kind of part three is what else can we do is we can plan your day. All right. And so that's why I wanted to tie this into, we're talking about return on time, right? And we talk about this example that came up for me getting the return on time of $7,900 for 1 hour. Okay. But the reason I also bring this up is at the time of hearing this, you're probably, super swamped, super busy in the midst of the busy season. And there's literally probably 50 priorities on your to-do list for the week or for the day even, right? And so let's just do our best to plan our day and tackle the priorities that are the most pressing, that are also going to be the highest return on time. So plan your day. And I know for farmers, I get it because I'm a farmer myself. To plan your day is just to create a plan that's going to get all screwed up. I get that. It's really hard to plan the day. And truth be told, I didn't start planning my day until I created Pioneer Farmer, until I created having something else that I needed to really schedule some things out, right? So within Pioneer Farmer, as I'm meeting with clients, as I'm meeting with new prospects, and they're booking time on my calendar, and then I didn't start planning my day or scheduling my day until I started doing that, because all of a sudden, okay, I can have things that could pop up, right? I have a random meeting that might pop up with a client or prospect. And if I need to really work on something else during that time, I need to schedule that time out. So I need to plan the day. All right. And furthermore, one thing that's really been helpful for me, and this is just how I do it, it's important to find a system that works for you, because I treaded a long time and tried all these different systems and platforms out there and tools and apps and all this other stuff to find a system that worked for me. And it's important to find a system that works for you. But this is what works so far for me is I just use the notes on my phone. All right. So I'm an Apple guy and I'm a Mac guy. So those two talk really well together. So I use notes on my phone. So, I've talked probably in the past about how we have weekly team meetings. So me and my dad and even my wife will sit down every week, usually a Monday morning, try to have that team meeting every week. And so prior to that, I lay out everything that we need to do. So we talk about last week's wins, and then we dive into what's the weekly schedule for each one of us. And then we dive into the different businesses. So for Russ Camp Farms, for the farming entity, what's on the to-do list, the priority, what's urgent, and then what's non-urgent, just so we kind of know the differences there to really prioritize what needs to be taken care of. And we do that for each of our businesses. So for the farming entity and then for Pioneer Farmer, we do the same thing. And then that helps just kind of break down, okay, what's most important? What's things that we can do if we do have the time to actually accomplish them? And so what I'm getting at here is, so then furthermore, at the beginning of each day, I actually break down, all right, so we got to, as I record this, it's Tuesday, April 14th. Okay, so I just literally write Tuesday the 14th. And then I break down everything that I need to do throughout the day. And typically I try to put it in the order that I think it's going to happen. All right, so this one, record a podcast. We're doing it in the morning. All right, so it was kind of at the top of the to-do list there. And just break out and then plan out my day. And I realize that things are not going to go accordingly, but I try to plan that out. Okay, this is the things that I want to get done today. And then I come back the next day. So tomorrow I'll come back Wednesday morning and realize, okay, maybe I didn't get these things done. We'll just move them down to the next day. If they're really a top priority, let's move them down to make sure that they do at least happen this week. And so those are the things that's what I do to plan out my day. And I do it on the Notes app because I can view that on my computer and my phone, and it works really well that way. And then I can share that with others as well. So that's plan your day out. That's number three. Number four here is delegate. All right, delegate. So if we're getting to the point where we've just got so much on our to-do list, we can't even really try to prioritize what's going to be the highest return on our time because we've got so much to do. Well, this is to where maybe we can get to the point where we can finally delegate a little bit. Right? Maybe it's hiring somebody part-time to come in and do the things that they'd be more suited for, or maybe it's just delegating tasks that you're not very good at, letting somebody else take them. So that way you can go do something that you're better at and more efficient at. And I didn't say that you like more, by the way. I never said that. I said maybe do the tasks that you're more efficient at to where you can still get that highest ROI. Okay. And so that's maybe just delegating some different tasks, having different people on your team, whether it be full-time employees, maybe it be marketing advisor, maybe it be an agronomist, maybe it be a financial consultant or coach, whatever, just delegating some of those different tasks. And so that way we can spend our time on the things that are going to get us that highest ROI. So that delegation is going to be really critical, especially as we maybe grow in the business, as we're trying to grow in the business, trying to create, and this is just kind of a side comment here, but trying to create a decentralized command. All right. So a lot of times, and especially it seems like in farming businesses, we're so wrapped up into everything has to revolve around the one person, the main farmer, the head honcho there, if you will. And so what happens there is what happens if he's gone, all right? If he's sick or laid up in the hospital for a week, everything falls apart because it's a centralized operation. Everything revolves around him with him in the center. So very common, by the way. But let's see if we can try to actually basically deconnect that and create a decentralized command. So that way, we can start delegating these tasks. So that way other people in the operation know what's going on. And so that way, if the head honcho has to be gone, it doesn't just cripple the entire operation. That's kind of the goal there, kind of the twofold goal there with delegating is just to make sure that others around us are willing to take on some of that responsibility, taking some of that responsibility off of you, maybe as kind of the head person there. And then also, like I said, allowing you to do the things that are going to get you highest return on time. And I want to make the last comment here on delegation because I feel like it's one of those things where you have it in your mind. If you start going down this road and you acknowledging, and if you're aware that my time is going to be better spent doing all these other tasks, and you see all these other tasks as just the $10 an hour jobs, the $15 an hour jobs, as if they're not worth your time, that's a thought that's going to come up quite a bit. And it comes up for me all the time. All right. It comes up for me pretty often. And so we get to where it can be sometimes an ego thing too, where we think that we're better than that. We don't need to be spending our time doing that. And we got to be really careful when that ego comes into play because what happens if those jobs, even those $10 or $15 an hour jobs, don't get done? It's kind of like this pyramid, the stack of cups, if you will. I mean, we got the baseline cups. There's a lot more of those cups, right, to kind of create that base. Well, what happens if you pull one of those cups out of the bottom? Everything comes crashing down, right? So if we still don't get those $10, $15 an hour jobs done that we think that we're worth more and we don't get those done, it's still going to cripple the business. All right. So we got to realize that those jobs are still very important. All right. So if we bring somebody on the team, if we do start to delegate, you got to realize the importance of those different jobs and relay that importance and why that we still need to get those done, because that provides those people that are filling those seats value as well. Okay. And there's definitely a lot of value there, but maybe it's just kind of the different skill sets needed to fulfill those different seats. Right. So now it's just kind of realizing what needs to be done to make sure that somebody's in that seat to delegate, and then that you're still allowing yourself to spend your time somewhere else, that we're going to get that higher return on time, but realizing these jobs still need to get done. Okay. Because even if you just neglect all these jobs and you don't do them, it's going to ultimately affect your business in a negative way. So that's kind of the 4 different things there. Track your time, prioritize your tasks, plan your day, and delegate. Now, I want to give you the secret sauce to some of this. All right. I want to give you some secret sauce as to go about and you try to implement all these different things. Something else that you can add, kind of a bonus, if you will. I want you to try your best to schedule or take advantage of free time / quiet time. So what I mean by this is something that can be really hard when you're in the midst of the busy season, the go, 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 no stop, just go, go, go. All right. And so it's really hard for us to actually have free time or quiet time, if you will, sitting in the silence, embracing that. that can be very difficult because furthermore, and this might be contradictory to everything that I've said thus far, but furthermore, we talk about getting this return on time. How can we maximize this return on time? So maybe if you're in the tractor, you're listening to a podcast, you're partaking in all this stuff, consuming all this stuff, and it gets to a point to where we're just so go focused that we don't even have the chance to take a step back, have free time, and even quiet time. And there's a lot of advantages. There can be a really actually high ROI from that free time, from that quiet time where you're not doing anything. That might seem contradictory, but this is part of the secret sauce. That's why I call this the bonus here. It's something that I've have a hard time with, but I've also been trying to work on as well. Maybe it's hard because we're in the midst of busy season and we've got all these tasks, priorities to do. We can't schedule free time. I understand that. But maybe it's just quiet time in the tractor. Maybe instead of listening to a podcast or music, maybe we just listen to nothing. And this allows ourselves to think a little bit. So especially as kind of the visionary of the business of where you're trying to go within your business, maybe that allows us some time to kind of think forward in the future, maybe think about some different challenges, maybe just think. That thinking time can be, back to that ROT, can be really, really valuable, right? And then furthermore, having the ability to schedule some free time, even if it's just 10 minutes a day or maybe even 20 minutes a week, whatever that looks like for you, some free time to be creative, to think about the future, to be a visionary of the business and not just the integrator, not just the person that's working in the business. This is back to that, to working in the business versus on the business. Allowing yourself that free time helps you deconnect a little bit, take a step back, and see how you can best work on the business, getting that return on time. All right. So, a couple final thoughts here. The big thing when it comes to all of this that I've mentioned thus far, these 4 or 5 different things, including the secret sauce, including everything that we're trying to do, including being in the midst of all this, is here's the comment here that I want to make is progress over perfection. Prioritize the progress over perfection, because when we get it in our head that we're going to do this and we're going to do it to the best of our abilities and we're going to be perfect at it and we're going to knock it out of the park and our dollar per hour wage is now going to be $7,900, that's what it's going to be. We got to realize that this is life and things happen. All right. And so if we try to shoot for perfection and we fall short, that's okay. Progress is the most important thing here, to realize that, okay, today this is where I'm at. But next week, next year, I'm going to be a lot further ahead if I just try to work on consistent, steady progress. All right. Consistent, steady progress. All right. Now, here's the last comment. Last comment here. So, this is the one thing that I've heard this phrase multiple times when it comes to return on investment, ROI, and even ROT. Okay. I think it's also important to realize that not all return is in the form of monetary, or especially not all this return is going to be immediate. Okay. The big thing there, I mentioned the dollar amount earlier, traded 1 hour of my time for $7,900. I keep coming back to that and you're probably tired of hearing it. And I mentioned the dollar amount. So it's easy for us to see the dollar amounts, especially, maybe we're doing some custom work and it's pretty easy for us to equate that dollar amount for our time and come up with that quick math so we understand what our time is worth. Okay. But not all return on time is monetary. Once again, might be a little bit controversial, but I got to throw this in there. I got to throw this in there because if we take everything that I talk about today and we focus solely on return on our time for a dollar amount and how to maximize that and how to make the most of it, we're going to lose sight of a few things ultimately at the end of the day. And this might be what I'm talking about here is really like the family and kids and the time that we spend with those two. And what can we do to make sure that we don't forget about those? Okay. Because if we take everything I said today and focus solely on the return on our time from a monetary standpoint, we're going to forget about the family and the kids, because we might think about, well, the couple hours that I'm in the house in the evening for supper and bedtime, I'm not making any money. I'm not making any money. Well, yeah, that might be true, but that does not mean that you're not providing value, right? So that ultimately comes down to is, when we reframe that to some extent, that not all return is in monetary, especially immediately. Okay. So for example, there is, if I want to spend some time with my kids, I'm not going to get that money back in my pocket. I'm not going to get that return immediately. But maybe, just maybe, by actually spending time now with the kids, you're not going to get the return now, but maybe in the future, they'll actually want to spend time with you because you spent time with them. Okay. That's kind of what I'm getting at here is not all return is in the form of monetary or money. and it's definitely not immediate. So, last kind of comment there to make sure that we don't lose sight of that, because I want to always bring that home to some extent that we got to ask ourselves, why are we doing this? If we're trying to shoot for the highest ROT, return on our time, return on investment, and trying to maximize that, we also got to ask why, for what reason, and at the end of the day, also for what cost. If we just solely focus on work and not on family or not on balance to build a good nest egg so that way we can give our kids all these experiences and all these other things, well, is that really what they want? Because maybe at the end of the day, what do we want? So for me and my wife, one of the things that we have as our goal is to have our kids to want to be around us when we're older. All right. So that way they come back to the nest to some extent and want to be around us. Well, I feel like in order to do that, we have to want to be around them now. So realizing that not all return is monetary. All right. So as we get to rounding this out, I was actually thinking of really good at quoting kids' movies here. And one of the movies that I'm going to quote is actually Planes, Fire, and Rescue. If you've seen it, if you got kids, you're probably going to be able to relate to this. But as we move forward here, as we sign off for the day, the phrase that comes up for me is at the end of the movie, one of the planes says, "Go and be safe." Well, right now, I want you to go and trade your time wisely. All right, but also be safe as it is the busy season. So hope you found value in today's episode, and we'll catch you guys next time. Thanks for tagging along with me today as we sharpened our mindsets. If you've gained insight from today's episode, be sure to take a screenshot to share or send this episode to somebody who might also find value in it. For more, follow me on Instagram @GarrettRuskamp or on Facebook, and join me next time for more conviction through clarity.